I think Billy Wilder's Witness for the Prosecution is one of his most brilliantly entertaining films. And it was very popular and was nominated for 6 Oscars. And yet, it tends to be a bit sidelined in Wilder's studies, as if it's a lesser work. And I think it's because it's one of those films that Wilder made between his divorce from his earlier co-writing partner, Charles Brackett, after Sunset Boulevard, and before his permanent partnership with I.L. Diamond, which is consolidated with Some Like It Hot, and from that time forth he becomes, his absolutely indispensable collaborator. And between those 2 dates, Wilder was hopping from studio to studio and making film versions of stage hits. Stalag 17, Sabrina Fair, 7 Year Itch, and of course Witness for the Prosecution. And I think a lot of critics thought he was playing a bit safe. After Sunset Boulevard, he'd made a very personal film, Ace in the Hole, which I think is one of his greatest films, and he thought was one of his greatest films, but was not at all popular. And as I say, I think the critics thought he was playing safe between this period, and Witness for the Prosecution is one evidence of that. Take a hit stage play and bring it to the screen. I think this impression, though, is wrong on 2 counts, shall I put it that way. Firstly, there are a couple of other films that Wilder made during this period, which are not like that, and which I think are crying out for revaluation. One of them was Spirit of St. Louis, a very unusual Wilder film, his film version of Lindbergh's Flight to Paris. And the other was Love in the Afternoon, which is very rarely shown, but which is a very interesting sort of Lubitsch style Wilder film with Gary Cooper and Audrey Hepburn, and which was his first collaboration with I.L. Diamond. The second reason why I would query this, the idea that Wilder was playing safe, is that when he takes a stage success, he really Wilderizes it. He doesn't just do a reverent adaptation. He really turns it into something that is very personal to him. I always like the story that George Axelrod told. He's the screenwriter and playwright of the hit play The 7 Year Itch. And apparently on his first day of working on the screenplay with Wilder, he came in with a copy of the play, and he said jokingly to Wilder, "I expect we'll need this." And Wilder said to him, "Yes, we'll use it as a doorstop." And I think that gives an idea of Wilder's attitude to the original. It was there as a basis, and there was clearly, material that appealed to him in lots of ways. But that was just the starting point. It wasn't going to be anything like, a simple thing of just sort of putting the stage play onto screen. And certainly if you compare the stage play of Witness for the Prosecution with what Wilder has done with it, the differences are enormous, and Wilder has brought an enormous sense of comedy and character to the original material that lifts it onto a whole different level, I think. His co-writer on this film was Harry Kurnitz, who's a very experienced and distinguished screenwriter, an Anglophile, also a writer of mystery novels under the pseudonym of Marco Page. From all accounts, it doesn't seem as if Kurnitz had a very happy experience. He's quoted as saying, that one thing you have to remember, is that Billy Wilder at work is 2 people, Mr. Hyde and Mr. Hyde. And I think Wilder gave his co-writers during this period quite a hard time. But the filming actually seemed to have gone very smoothly. It was shot in roughly 40 days, I think, in Goldwyn Studios in Los Angeles. Alexander Trauner, Wilder's production designer, had built this really elaborate replica of the Old Bailey in the studio, apparently with 60 different panels to facilitate camera movement. I think the set cost $75,000, which is a lot of money in those days. The changes that Wilder had made to the original, I think, are really interesting. kept the basic plot and the basic surprise element in it. He did genuinely admire Agatha Christie as a writer. He thought she was rather underrated, that she didn't have a lot of poetry in her writing, but she's very good on structure. And it sort of anticipates what he was going to do with Conan Doyle, I think, in 10 years' time, in the Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where he does actually start from a basis of respect and is not in any way trying to undermine, if you like, the reputations of these writers. But his adaptation is quite radical, and he particularly the introduction of the character of the nurse, played by Elsa Lanchester, beautifully played, I think, and of course she was Charles Laughton's wife. And this is the character who is fussing over Sir Wilfrid because he's recently had a heart attack, and all of this stuff is not in the play, and looking after him, but also treating him as a naughty little boy and sort of trying to keep him away from his vices like cigars and brandy. Of course, the other major change is the building up of the character of Sir Wilfrid Robards, who in the play is a rather dull, misogynistic character, but in the film, you know, is just, I was going to say, blown up into this wonderful, over-the-top barrister played with huge relish and tremendous skill by Charles Laughton. When you look at it in the context of Wilder's career, it's quite remarkable how it seems to be similar to Sunset Boulevard in lots of ways. You know, you've got the older woman and the younger man relationship, the older woman who is well-to-do, the younger man who is not doing too well, and how that relationship develops, where it's her adoration on one side and his exploitation on the other, and building up finally to a murder, watched over by this housekeeper who is looking over the interests of, in this case, her mistress. And there are other facets as well, I think, that are very much in Wilder's particular style. The hero is a very much like a usual Wilder hero, someone on the make who is after going to exploit great opportunity that he can. You know, if you think of Wilder's screenplays before he became a director, like the Charles Boyer character in Hold Back the Dawn, but then you get heroes of Double Indemnity, Sunset Boulevard, Ace in the Hole, The Apartment, 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. He's a very sort of characteristic Wilder figure. The character of Wilfrid Robards as well is a Wilder figure in some ways. You know, I think Wilder liked these sort of investigator, detective type figures who are not quite as clever as they think they are. And they've got their own little methods of, which they think are infallible, of sniffing out guilty people. But in fact, they're very often deceived by the evidence of their own eyes. And this happens to, you know, Edward G. Robinson's Keyes in Double Indemnity. And it happens to Sherlock Holmes in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where all of them are deceived by a woman whom they underestimate. And there are lots of things like that. The first meeting of Leonard Vole, the Tyrone Power character, and it's his French, the widow, Norma Varden, is very different in the film from in the play, but a very Wilder type introduction. I mean, it's all to do with hats, which are always significant in Wilder, I think. The hat in Sunset Boulevard, which is ruffled by a microphone when Norma Desmond visits the studio. Jack Lemmon's bowler in The Apartment, etc. So there are all these little touches, I think, that make it a Wilder film. The use of objects as well is very, very interesting. There's a drawer that's used as an ashtray. His cane conceals cigars. His cocoa flask actually contains brandy. There's one moment in the trial when he reads out from what seem like incriminating letters, and they turn out to be a bill for some Bermuda shorts that have been ordered on his behalf. It's a very interesting thing in Wilder, I think, because his camera work is very unobtrusive, and it seems to be very straightforward. And yet one of the main themes in a Wilder film is always seeing is deceiving, that people are misread the evidence before their eyes. And of course, one of the central twists in the film is when this happens, when Sir Wilfrid and his solicitor go to see this mysterious woman at the station. And I don't think anybody is necessarily deceived by the disguise, as they're very often not in Wilder's films. The emphasis is not on the expertness of the disguise or impersonation. It's the emphasis becomes on how much the person wants to be deceived, in some ways. And that runs right through Wilder's thing. In fact, this is the thing which marks out, I think, Witness for the Prosecution, particularly as a Wilder film, which is the whole theme of disguise and deception. There's the flashback that takes place in Hamburg, where the Leonard Vole character, played by Tyrone Power, describes how he's met his wife. In the play, this is just a single line. In the film, Wilder works in a complete flashback sequence, which allows him, of course, to film Marlene Dietrich doing one of her numbers. And I'm sure he wouldn't pass up a chance like that. And of course, Wilder and Dietrich were quite old friends. He knew her in the Berlin days and had directed her before in A Foreign Affair. And I always like that moment in a Peter Bogdanovich interview with Marlene Dietrich, where Bogdanovich says to her at one stage, "You worked with a lot of great directors." And Dietrich said, "No, I didn't. I worked with two great directors, Joseph von Sternberg and Billy Wilder." It was Dietrich's idea to make this film. She saw it as a great love story, but the director that she particularly wanted to do it was Billy Wilder. And as I say, the flashback scene is interesting because it's important for the character, for the later plot twist, that we can see that she is a performer. So it gives a certain kind of plausibility, I think, to, as I say, to the later plot film. Though, actually, I think one of the motifs of the film is that everybody in the main parts is acting. I think acting is an important kind of sub-theme of the film. But I think the other thing that Wilder exploits very cleverly is Dietrich going through her nightclub routine in a very seductive way that ends in a kind of riot. And you think, oh yes, this is Dietrich as femme fatale, Blue Angel, Foreign Affair, etc. And I think it's underlined actually by one of the interesting subtexts of the film, which is the film sort of draws attention to a still lingering post-war hostility and suspicion of the English towards the Germans. Laughton, of course, had a reputation for being difficult, shall we say. He wasn't difficult on this film. Wilder said he was absolutely astonishing. He said he's the greatest actor who ever lived. He said, he gave you everything you could possibly want, times 10. He said, he's he was word perfect at every rehearsal, and yet he kept adding things and they were always good. And Wilder was just blown away by his talent. And Laughton clearly loved the role. One of the great joys of that film, I think, for Wilder was working with Laughton. It's well known that he wanted to cast Laughton again in Mother Deuce, but unfortunately Laughton had died before that was possible. According to Billy Wilder, Agatha Christie told him that this was the best film adaptation of her work. Whether she said that or not, I think she was right.